In 1956, a 25-year-old in Omaha raised exactly $105,100 to start an investment fund. Only $100 of it was his own money. 70 years later, that fund had grown into one of the largest fortunes in human history, and the man who built it had just stepped down after 60 years at the top. This is the story of Warren Buffett. The full story. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Loved Numbers. Warren Buffett was born in Omaha, Nebraska, in 1930, the son of a stockbroker who later became a U.S. congressman. From almost the moment he could count, money fascinated him more than anything else. As a small child he was already selling chewing gum door to door and collecting bottle caps to track which soft drinks sold best on his grandfather's street corner. Other kids played, Buffett kept ledgers. By the time he was a teenager, he and a friend had bought a used pinball machine, placed it in a local barbershop, and split the coins with the owner every week. Within months they owned several machines scattered across the neighborhood, quietly built and sold like a real business, entirely run by two teenagers. At 11, Buffett took his savings and bought his first shares of stock, 3 shares of Citi's Service Preferred, purchased alongside 3 more for his older sister Doris, at just over $38 apiece. He had spent nearly every dollar he owned. The stock immediately dropped, and young Buffett watched nervously for weeks before it finally recovered. The moment it edged above what he paid, he sold for a small profit. Then he watched, helpless, as the same stock kept climbing without him, eventually reaching $200 a share. He never forgot that feeling. Decades later he would call it one of the most important lessons of his life. Patience, he realized, was worth far more than the relief of a quick, small win. By 14, Buffett was running multiple newspaper delivery routes across Washington, D.C., waking before dawn to carry both morning and afternoon editions past the doors of senators and, on at least one route, a Supreme Court justice. That year he filed his very first tax return, reporting earnings of $592.50, and attaching handwritten notes claiming a watch repair and bicycle costs as business expenses. He owed the government $7. With the money he had saved from papers and pinball machines, the 14-year-old bought 40 acres of farmland outright and rented it out to a local farmer, becoming a landlord before he could legally drive. Chapter 2. Learning from the Master. By the time Buffett reached college, he had already devoured a book that would define the rest of his life, Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor. Graham argued that a stock wasn't just a flickering price on a board, it was a fractional piece of a real business, and its true worth could be calculated with discipline rather than guessed at with emotion. Buffett was so determined to study under Graham personally that he applied to Columbia Business School specifically because Graham taught there. In Graham's class, Buffett earned the only A+ the famously demanding professor gave out in years of teaching. After graduating, Buffett wanted nothing more than to work for Graham directly, and offered to do it for free. Graham turned him down at first. Buffett went home to Omaha, sold securities for his father's firm, and kept writing to his mentor. Eventually Graham relented, and Buffett spent 2 formative years at Graham-Newman Corporation in New York, studying how his teacher hunted for companies trading for less than the cash sitting in their own bank accounts. It was less about buying whatever was popular, and everything about buying $1 of real business value for 50 cents. When Graham retired and wound down his firm in 1956, Buffett, now 25, went home to Omaha with a philosophy fully formed but with almost no capital of his own to apply it. He had savings of about $170,000 from years of careful investing, modest for a man who would later become one of the richest people alive, but he wanted outside capital to manage on a larger scale. He wasn't interested in working for a big Wall Street firm. He wanted to run money his own way, by his own rules, answerable to almost no one. Chapter 3. The $105,000 Bet. In May 1956, Buffett formally launched Buffett Associates, Ltd., later renamed Buffett Partnership. He put in just $100 of his own money. 7 family members and friends put in the rest: his sister Doris and her husband, his aunt Alice, his father-in-law, and a handful of others who barely knew what they were signing up for beyond trusting a 25-year-old they'd watched grow up. Altogether they contributed $105,000, bringing the partnership's total starting capital to $105,100. Buffett charged himself no salary and took no fee unless he beat a fixed return for his partners first, an arrangement almost unheard of on Wall Street then or now. Buffett ran the partnership almost like Graham had taught him, hunting for unloved, undervalued companies most investors ignored entirely, and occasionally buying enough shares to influence how a struggling business was run. Word spread quietly around Omaha and beyond, not through advertising but through returns. Year after year, the partnership beat the broader stock market, in some years by enormous margins, without a single losing year across its entire existence. By the early 1960s, additional partnerships had merged into one, and outside investors from around the country were pleading to get in, even as Buffett began quietly capping how much new money he'd accept. In 1959, a mutual friend introduced Buffett to a sharp-tongued Omaha lawyer named Charlie Munger, and the two hit it off immediately over dinner, talking business late into the night. Munger never invested directly in the partnership, but he became Buffett's closest sounding board, and over the following years he pushed Buffett to loosen Graham's stricter rule of buying only statistically cheap, mediocre businesses. Munger's argument was simple: it was far better to buy a wonderful business at a fair price than a fair business at a wonderful one. Buffett later called Munger, only half-jokingly, the architect who broadened him from a narrow bargain hunter into someone willing to pay up for real quality. In 1962, the partnership began quietly buying shares of a struggling New England textile manufacturer trading for a price that seemed absurdly cheap compared to its assets, a company called Berkshire Hathaway, at around $7.50 a share. Buffett meant it purely as a classic Graham-style bargain, a company worth more dead than alive. He had no plan yet to make it the center of his empire. But a personal insult from Berkshire's management during a stock buyback negotiation made Buffett angry enough to instead buy control of the entire company outright, in 1965. It would prove to be one of the most consequential decisions of his life, for reasons he could not have predicted. By 1969, the partnership's assets had grown from that original $105,100 to more than $100 million, compounding at nearly 30% a year for over a decade without a single losing year. But Buffett had grown uneasy. Prices across the stock market had climbed so high that the kind of bargains his whole method depended on had all but disappeared. Rather than chase performance into investments he no longer understood, Buffett did something almost unheard of on Wall Street. He shut the partnership down entirely, returned the money to his partners, and let those who wished convert their share into stock of the company the partnership already controlled, Berkshire Hathaway. Chapter 4. The Mistake That Built an Empire. For 2 decades, Buffett tried to make the textile business work. He modernized machinery, cut costs, and reinvested profits, hoping discipline could rescue a dying industry. It couldn't. Over one 9-year stretch, the textile operations produced over $500 million in sales and still lost money overall, bled dry by cheaper overseas competition. In 1985, Buffett finally shut the mills down for good. Decades later, he would call the purchase of Berkshire Hathaway itself the single biggest investment mistake of his career, estimating it had cost him roughly $200 billion in returns he could have earned had he simply put that same money into a business he actually believed in from day one. But the failure carried a hidden gift. The cash the textile mills had generated over the years, however reluctantly, became seed money Buffett redirected into an entirely different kind of business: insurance. An insurance company collects premiums today and only pays out claims later, sometimes years later, leaving a growing pool of cash sitting in the meantime that Buffett could invest however he wished. He used that pool, what he later nicknamed the float, to buy stakes in companies like Geico, See's Candies, and the Washington Post, then reinvested their profits into buying still more businesses outright. The textile company's name stayed on the door. Almost nothing else about it remained the same. By the 1970s and 1980s, Berkshire Hathaway had quietly transformed from a dying New England mill into a sprawling collection of insurance, media, retail, and manufacturing businesses, all funneling cash back to Omaha for Buffett to redeploy. He rarely sold what he bought, preferring to hold great businesses indefinitely and let their earnings compound year after year, largely untouched by taxes or trading costs. Wall Street began sending analysts and reporters to Omaha every spring just to hear him explain, in plain language and self-deprecating humor, why he'd bought what he'd bought. The annual shareholder meeting eventually grew so large it was nicknamed Woodstock for capitalists. Chapter 5. Becoming a Billionaire. The numbers behind Buffett's climb are almost hard to believe next to how he actually lived. At 21, his personal net worth was still under $20,000. By 26 he had crossed $140,000. At 30, he passed $1 million, a milestone he later admitted he'd assumed would take him far longer. In 1986, at 56 years old, Buffett became a billionaire for the first time, all while paying himself an annual salary from Berkshire of just $100,000, a figure he kept essentially unchanged for decades afterward, because nearly all of his real wealth was never cash. It was simply the rising value of the shares he already owned. Buffett bought the house he still lives in today back in 1958, a 5-bedroom home in Omaha, for $31,500. Even as his fortune grew past the billions, he never bought a mansion, never collected sports cars, and was famously photographed eating breakfast from a paper McDonald's bag most mornings, choosing his order based on how the stock market had performed that day. He has said repeatedly that large houses and multiple properties felt to him like liabilities dressed up as luxuries, expensive to maintain and, in his view, entirely unnecessary for a life he considered already comfortable enough. That restraint was never really about money at all, it was about what Buffett believed money was for. He has said his own success owed enormously to lucky timing, being born in a country and an era where his specific skills were richly rewarded, and that recognizing this made hoarding an ever-growing pile of billions feel less like a personal trophy and more like a temporary responsibility. That belief would eventually reshape not just how he lived, but what he ultimately decided to do with almost everything he had built. Chapter 6. The End of an Era. In 2010, Buffett joined Bill and Melinda Gates to launch the Giving Pledge, publicly committing to give away 99% of his fortune to philanthropy, during his lifetime or at his death, rather than pass the bulk of it down to his own children. He has always argued that leaving heirs an amount so vast it removes any need to build something of their own does neither them nor society any favors. Piece by piece, in annual share donations, he has been quietly making good on that promise for years, funding foundations focused on global health, poverty, and education rather than attaching his own name to buildings. In May 2025, at Berkshire's shareholder meeting, Buffett told the room something many had wondered about for years but rarely heard him say plainly: it was time to step aside. He recommended Greg Abel, the executive who had quietly run Berkshire's non-insurance operations for years, to become the company's next chief executive. The board agreed unanimously. On December 31, 2025, Warren Buffett officially stepped down as CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, closing a run at the helm that had lasted 60 years, remaining on only as chairman of the board while Abel took over the daily reins in January 2026. The scale of that patience is easiest to see in a single comparison. $100 invested in Berkshire Hathaway stock back in 1965 would have grown to somewhere around $6 million 6 decades later. The same $100 invested in the broader S&P 500 over that same stretch, dividends included, would have grown to roughly $45,000, itself a genuinely good result. Berkshire's stock compounded at nearly 20% a year against the market's roughly 10, and over 60 years, that gap between the two numbers didn't just add up. It multiplied on top of itself, year after year, until it became one of the largest wealth gaps ever produced by a single publicly traded company. By early 2026, estimates of Buffett's personal fortune ranged anywhere from around $145 billion to well over $160 billion, depending on the day and exactly how Berkshire's stock happened to be trading, a reminder that even the world's most famous investors' wealth is still, in the end, just a number that moves. What never moved was the arithmetic underneath it: $100 of his own money, joined by 105,000 more from people who simply trusted him, compounding patiently for almost 70 years, largely left alone to grow. Warren Buffett never claimed to have a secret formula. He bought pieces of real businesses he understood, paid a fair price, and then did the hardest part of all: he waited, for decades, while almost everyone else around him didn't. That patience, more than any single stock pick, is the real algorithm behind his money. Money has rules, and most people never learn them. Follow algorithm of money and start decoding yours.